remember to, and it's recording to the cloud, having made that mistake once and put it on my computer. It's always good to know that you're doing it the right way. So welcome everyone. Let's begin with some introductions. My name is Valerie Chapman. I'm the chair of the board, and I live on Evergreen Street, just a block from the trolley trail. Mark?
Hi, Mark Elliott. I'm vice chair with Valerie, and I live off of Concord Road on Riesling Road.
Joseph?
Hi, I'm Joseph Ed. I am a director at large on the board, and I live in the River Forth neighborhood.
And Jane?
Jane Civiletti, treasurer. I live on the corner of Oak Grove Boulevard and Fair Oaks Ave.
But she's coming to us from the East Coast tonight, so we're grateful that you're still awake.
Far, far away.
Yeah. So before we introduce everyone and have you give your name and give us an idea where you live, is there anyone who is new to the meeting tonight who has not been with us before? Then let's just go ahead and we'll introduce the members of the community and get started. Cindy.
I'm Cindy Brown. I live at Rose Villa.
Tina.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm in Concord Oaks area off of Concord near Southview.
Okay, and it says, okay, yes, got that. So welcome. We're glad to have you tonight. Bob?
Thank you.
Bob Bohannon. I live down on Southeast Laurie, kind of adjacent to Rosevilla.
Welcome. Kimberly? Kimberly, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what neighborhood you're in? You're not. All right. I'm not sure. Kimberly, can you hear me?
Put something in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat. Okay. Forgot the headphones using subtitles to read. Okay, so we're we're glad you're here with us tonight. Carolyn.
Carolyn Stuckey. I live on Chestnut Street, not far from Oak Grove Boulevard.
Welcome. Baldwin.
So there we go. I'm Baldwin Vanderbilt. I live almost next door to Stringfield Park.
Welcome. And the Hammonds.
Tom and Jolene, we live on Viewcrest Drive off of Wallace.
Paul Savas.
Paul Savas. I live off of Cromberg Avenue, which is 2 blocks off of Oak Grove Boulevard near Oak Grove Fred Meyer.
Good to see you tonight. Linda.
Linda Seals, and I live at the south end of Woodland Way.
Gwian.
I'm Gwian. I live at Evergreen and 25th, close to the trolley trail and the MAX stations.
Ben.
Hi there, my name's Ben Cheney. I live up on Briggs at Snowberry, which I believe puts me about 8 blocks from the trolley trail.
Welcome. Daniel.
Hey, Daniel Dyer Greenside. I live just up near the MAX station and near Valerie and Gwian.
Welcome. Nice to see you tonight. Dave.
Dave Doback. I live at Rose Villa.
Welcome. Rich. Rich, are you there to introduce yourself? We'll come back. Thelma.
I'm Hagen Miller. I live off of Concord, just south on the corner of Southview and Westview.
Like to see you tonight. Karen. Karen Olberding.
Oh,
Are you there? You want to introduce yourself? What neighborhood you're in?
Karen Oberding, and I live on Mulberry off River Road.
Okay, welcome. Sue.
Sue Conahan. I live at the corner of Parkview Circle and River Road.
Grover.
Grover Jeffrey Bordenfeld, and I live on Boardman Avenue, one house over from the trolley trail.
Okay. And a visitor from Jennings Lodge area. Correct. Good to
Thanks
have
for
you.
letting me in.
Good to have you with us tonight. And Neil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here. My name is Neil Schulman. I'm the Executive Director of the North Clackamas Watersheds Council, and I'll be talking more about that later, but our territory includes Oak Grove and Jennings Lodge, among other areas.
Good. Well, welcome everyone. It's good to have you all here tonight. Let's begin with some officer reports. We have a financial report that I believe Mark is going to give for tonight. Yeah.
yes, thank you. I'm going to do a impersonation of Jane Civilevity, even though she's still on the phone on the show here. So Jane provided this information to us. So we had since our last meeting in July, we had an expenditure of $647.64. That is a 3-year payment for our website host fee. So that drew us down to our balance currently of $647.64. Thank you.
We sent out minutes with the agenda. Were there any corrections or changes to the minutes that needed to be made? If not, we'll have them stand approved as sent out. Thank you. So one report coming from the board is that we have been, the board, particularly Mark and I, have been looking for a place for us to hold hybrid meetings for a while. And we have been talking with the Oak Lodge Water Services District, and we think that's going to be a go for us to be able to meet at their building on the corner of Oak Grove Boulevard and River Road. So they have a really nice meeting room that's about 30-foot square. So we're excited about that opportunity, having had conversations with Susan Keel and also with Brad Albert. So what we need to know from the community tonight is, are you interested? Should we move ahead with having hybrid meetings at the water district? So if there's, are there questions about that? If not, if somebody would like to make a motion from the floor, that would be wonderful too.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second that motion. Sooner I can get off of this electronic stuff, the better for me.
Great. Is there any discussion about this? Great. Thank you, Kimberly, for that message. If there is no discussion about this, are there any objections to moving to the water district? Dave, is that an objection? Would you like to talk
No,
about
that's not an objection. That's a concurrence and approval.
Okay, all right. I was looking to see if there was any objections.
That's a thumbs up.
Great. If there are no objections, then we will move forward with that, unanimously approved. The second piece of that is, in order to have hybrid meetings, we have to have equipment to do that. So we have been in conversation with the water district about, they have been thinking about moving forward with getting an LED screen that would be in that meeting room. And if they get that screen, that will make it easier for us to just plug in our equipment when we get that. We can ask the newly formed Friends of Oak Grove Community Council 501c3 that was formed, if they can assist us. They were formed to help support the Oak Grove Community Council. So we can ask them if they will assist us with acquiring that, the equipment that we need, which will likely involve some fundraising on their part, and they would be sending fundraising information to the community and to all of us. Are there questions about that and about that opportunity? Can we get a motion from the floor to make a request to the Friends of Oak Grove Community Council?
So move.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Is there any discussion? Then we will be moving forward. We'll make a request. There's a lot of crossover here between the members of the 501c3 and the community, and so we will do that, but we will make sure that it is all put down on paper that way. And then we would encourage you to look for fundraising requests, that letter that might come with Friends, and any donations then that go to the Friends of Oak Grove Community Council are tax deductible. It is newly formed 501c3 and ready to fundraise. So great. That I look forward to, actually seeing people in person. I had some interesting experiences of running into people at the Oak Grove Festival this summer and not recognizing them. I want to have a little square that we can just put around our face when we meet at the first time. We can put our names in the corner so we know who we're talking to, because people look different when we get to see them in person. So I look forward to that. So with that, let's move, and we have invited Commissioner Paul Savas to come and be with us tonight and give us kind of an broad strokes around the county budget, what to look for, what to think about, and any concerns related to that, Commissioner, that you might have for us. So thank you for being here.
Well, great. Thank you, Valerie, and the board for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some information about the budget. And so for some of you who know or may not know, I've been on the commission now for about almost 14 years. And the budget, the nature of the budget tends to grow a little bit, but it gets more complex all the time. And with all the natural disasters we've experienced with the wildfires and the ice storm and COVID and everything else, from a budget standpoint, we receive monies like ARPA money, American Rescue Plan monies, and so forth. So even though we get these grants, it does inflate the actual budget, even though that may not be a permanent thing, like the ARPA money, the $81 million we received from the federal government for the American Rescue Plan dollars. So these numbers sound really big, but in reality, as I whittle down to what we actually have that's actually discretional and what is actually fungible, meaning we can actually move it around, you'll find that it's a pretty slim budget. So I'll begin with that. So our overall budget that we approved in June was about $1.6 billion with a B. And if we add in the special districts, WES and NCPRD and all the others, there's 8 other component units, we call it, that budget goes to $2.1 billion. Again, all of that is not real money in the sense that we actually receive that kind of money. And I'll elaborate a little bit farther. The general fund, which the county really operates on, that's really our discretionary money. that we can move around. We pay a number of things for. So that's about $160 million, primarily funded with your property taxes. Of that, half of that typically, historically, has gone to the sheriff's office. So in this case, last year for the fiscal year 24-25, that amount is about $78 million goes towards the sheriff's office. And while I'm on the sheriff's office, I will say that's not all the money they get. They actually, that's half the money they get, because some of you, or actually all of us who live in the Jenny's Lodge and Oak Grove area, pay on our property taxes, enhanced law enforcement district. So you're paying it a little bit more. There's also a levy that was passed a couple years ago. So you're paying for law enforcement there as well. And also there's other grants that we receive from the state and the federal government. So the overall budget for the sheriff is about over $160 million. When I came on the commission 14 years ago, it was closer to $50 to $60 million. So it's grown substantially. They have seen gradual increases virtually every year. The part of the departments that get either complete or partial funding of the general fund, the remainder of that 160 million I spoke of earlier that we have is discretionary, which is property tax based, half goes to the sheriff. So the other pieces go towards departments such as the tax assessor's office, about $9 million, county administration, disaster management, our legal counsel's office, the county clerk's office who runs our elections and so forth. District attorney's office, substantial amount of money there, about $15 million. Finance, which takes care of all the finances for the county, all the component units. Health and Human Services gets a big chunk of that. The juvenile department gets a chunk of that. And what's the other big one? DTD, Department of Transportation Development. Though a lot of those monies they receive, a majority of their budget, which is closer to, I will say revenue from a revenue standpoint, is north of $30 million. A majority of that is gas tax and vehicle registration fees and other fees. But the general fund portion of their budget is about $7 million. We also have the treasurer's office and so on. So collectively, that other $80 million of that 160 goes towards those component units. As some of you probably know, we are building a courthouse, and that has actually put a tremendous amount of pressure on the budget, in which we've had to really scale back a number of things to make the annual payment, if you will. The way the courthouse has been funded is with what's called a P3, a public-private partnership. We own the land underneath it, but we don't own the building. We'll be technically leasing the building. That's how I describe it to everyone, for about 30 years. And that lease payment, which is really a payment to pay the bonds, that's how the developer is going to pay their cost. That payment is about $15 to $16 million annually, and it goes up a little bit every year. And in the latter years, it'll be probably closer to $18 to $19 million annual payment. And then we will be the owner thereafter, after that 30-year period. That has really put a lot of pressure on the budget. So our discretionary amount our true discretionary amount after paying for district attorney's office and legal counsel and tax assessor's office has really gone down. And yet the inflationary, as you know, inflation has not only affected our households, it's also affected the county operations and so forth. So we are seeing a higher rate of inflation than ever before, coupled with a property tax base that's actually fixed by state law. So our property tax base is only allowed to go up about 3% a year, not including new development that comes on the property tax roll. So we are in this pinch. And while right now we know that the inflation rate is down, we have not experienced a deflationary aspect when it comes to cost. So as you know, you go to the grocery store, a gallon of milk or a dozen eggs or a loaf of bread, those prices are still high. They haven't come down. And so therefore, though we are in a low inflation rate at the moment, we don't foresee, unfortunately, a deflationary period in which we'll be able to catch up or make up any of that. I will add slightly. Of course, we have a lot of employees, about 2,500 employees. About 2,200 of those are full-time employees. And we can't do all the work that we do and all the different ways we do without our employees. So those costs are going up. They are also, you know, homeowners or renters and so forth. They have households. They need to pay their. So we are really feeling the pressures everywhere. And it's a little frightening, frankly, but when I first came on the commission, we were only 14 years ago, they were only budgeting, and they weren't really doing much of a forecast. They were only forecasting a year, like, you know, 1 year out. And we did not have reserves. We did not have contingency policies. We didn't have anything at the time. So it wasn't as organized and didn't have the level of discipline, fiscal discipline that we currently have today. We have done a substantial improvement, frankly. I'm far more comfortable with the finances of the county and the way that we manage it. Not so comfortable with the fact that we've got all these pressures and it's really, really tight, but we are doing a good job of managing our situation. So now we forecast with a 5-year look and a 30-year look. And the reason we use a 30-year look is because we are calculating in those payments for the courthouse. So that's a kind of a grand overview, and I would love for anyone that has any specific questions or interest, whether you want to put it in the chat or raise your hand, or Valerie, if you want to manage that, I'm happy to see hands go up, but any specific questions, I'm happy to address.
So do people have questions? Jane?
Commissioner Salvis, the 30-year mortgage, as it were, on the courthouse, is there some legal contingency written into that? Should there be something in the next, say, 10 years, 5 years after the courthouse is built, like an earthquake or a disaster that destroys the building? Is the county still liable to pay the rest of the 20 years? Or is there something written in that the building's gone now and we're off the hook?
Well, that's a great question. And as I mentioned, the owner of the building is this corporation, this public-private partnership. They own the building. They have a responsibility to keep the doors open. We pay the power utility bills, but they maintain the building. So if the building, let's just say even part of their construction, part of it fails, they're responsible for 30 years to maintain that building. I would imagine, frankly, that they have to ensure that. So that's a great question. I will look into that. But my presumption is, being very close to this, my presumption is, and my memory is, that for that 30-year period, it's their job to keep the doors open and make that building available. So I think it's on them to ensure it, because we are not the owners until 30 years later. So I don't think it would be equitable to our citizens to have lack of ownership but responsibility for a natural disaster. But all that said, coming out of the pandemic, we certainly know that when we have these natural disasters, we do get a lot of help from the federal government. FEMA, for example, we get help, but sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years to actually recover those funds from FEMA. So that's why our reserves are so important, that we have some, so to speak, money in the bank to pay our bills to get us through that. But I will look into that and make sure that we get a solid answer back to the council about in the event of a 10-year earthquake and the building goes down, even though it is built to seismic standards. I do know that.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bob, and then after Bob, there's Gwen has a question, and then there's a question from Ben in the chat. So Bob?
Yeah, I just had a question. You mentioned the district attorney. I was under the understanding that the DA and the courts, the judges, everybody had been taken over by the state many years ago, and that they were funding and taking care of all of that. So is that something that's a shared expense, or are you having to pay for administrative people on the side, the clerks and that sort of thing, or? I don't know. I was just curious as to how that works, Paul.
Right, great. Well, thanks, Bob. Yes, both are true. We do share the cost that state does cover. I think the general rule of thumb, it's not, it's not explicit because there's different aspects of it that pay a larger percentage or a lesser percentage. But the general rule we use is that the state funds half of the staff and half of the operations. And then we fund the other half. So that 15 million that I shared with you earlier, that's our portion
I see.
of their budget.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for the question.
Gwen, question?
Hello, we have an electric car, so I was wondering if there were any mechanisms or plans for mechanisms for us to pay into the county what we would otherwise be paying in gas tax.
So we do have currently, are you asking the question from the standpoint of how that affects the road maintenance aspect and what would
Primarily,
be?
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
primarily.
Okay,
That's
so
what gas tax goes for then.
yeah, well, that's a great and also a timely question because tomorrow we'll be hosting the state legislature's Joint Committee on Transportation. They're coming out. We're going to give them a tour tomorrow and we're going to be talking about funding. And you may hear this from here forward through early next year that the state is looking at trying to dig themselves out of a financial crisis. So it's in the billions of what they claim their financial predicament is. And it's not all associated, of course, due to the electric vehicles not paying their fair share. But in part, it's really that inflationary aspect I spoke of earlier, because it's affecting all governments, not just county or city. It's affecting everyone. So the state legislature in 2017, they passed a bill called HB 2017, and they increased the vehicle registration fee on electric cars higher than a gasoline powered car. So we were able to recover some, not all, but some of that loss of revenue. And also the other thing that it has added a lot of cost, electrification has added a lot of cost as we look at the increases. As you know, you're all paying your PG bill, this has gone up significantly. Well, that's because of a lot of state and federal legislation that requires cleaner sources for fuel and energy. And so therefore, those costs are really adding to it, plus all the infrastructure we need to provide for charging stations and so forth. So did I fully get to your question, Gwen?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
In the chat, Ben has, the question is, in the 5 and 30-year forecast, does the county remain solvent? Is the county legally, technically able to run a budget deficit?
Yeah, so by state law, every government has to have a balanced budget. And while that sounds really nice, I probably of any commissioner in the history of the county have been kind of critical of that because it sounds like everything's fine when you say we all have to pass a balanced budget, but you can have an entity, or a private business or a household that has a balanced budget, but they're going negative every year, right? They're actually losing money and they will eventually run out of money. We are not there. The county does have, and I've been fighting for this for a long time, and I won't say a play on words, but we've been trying to discuss the technical meanings of what's called a structurally sound budget or a structurally sustainable budget. And what that means is that using that 5-year forecast and 30-year forecast, we are making sure that we can meet those needs. So when we look at those forecasts, we are on a structural path and a framework to pay our bills and to be solvent. Now, we don't know what other crisis is going to come in the next 30 years, but we have that calculated in. So if we see something happen and we need to make an adjustment, it might be painful, but we'll make an adjustment to do that. But yes, we are fiscally sound going forward, but there's not much room, I'll tell you that. We have a great finance team. I'm really proud of the work they're doing, but we are really watching all of our pennies.
Daniel, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Savas. I was curious, maybe this is related to this. I noticed that as of, I think, last month or so, the Oak Lodge Library cut its hours. Is that related to the budget or is that something else, you know?
Yes, okay, great question. So the, all of the, well, that's not actually, so the, have to be careful here. You all pay on your property taxes a library district. So 3-310 was a measure that was put on the ballot in 2008. And thank you, we are all receiving that. So there are some libraries in Clackamas County that rely solely on the revenue from the library district, right? They get a portion, that big bucket of money, that 18-19 million dollars is divvied out across all the libraries based on their population and other formulaic factors. So the Oak Lodge Library lives solely on their distribution of those annual library district dollars, just as the Hoodland Library as well. Some of the city libraries, some of them rely solely on the library district funds, and some of them augment and have for years augment their library services with their general fund. Clackamas County, in forming this district, the theory was that we were going to disengage our general fund and funding of any libraries. That was the principle. However, due to a flaw in the formula, Gladstone, with the Gladstone issue, there was a lawsuit. Long story short, we settled that. We are actually next Saturday, we're going to be cutting the ribbon on the new Gladstone library. It will be part of the formula. Gladstone will still make their annual contribution for their portion of it. And hence we'll be operating 2 libraries, but we're actually going to call it 1 library with 2 locations. That's basically the theory. The only contribution the county made for the Oak Lodge Library is the construction. And we use some of that one-time ARPA money, American Rescue Plan dollars that I spoke of earlier. And that's primarily the source. But other than that, we have maintained the principle that we adopted in 2008. No general fund discretionary dollars will go towards libraries, whether they're city or otherwise. That's our policy. Long-winded answer there, but did I get your question, Daniel?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Are there other questions? So is there anything else you'd like to add, Commissioner Savas? I mean, budget-wise or not, or is there anything, upbeat you can tell us about the budget?
Well, yeah,
well,
well, two things, one is a little bit, because we're talking about budget, I ought to be very candid and just let you know, and some of you that are, work with or watch what's going on with the NCPRD, they have been in a structurally negative budget for a long time. They've been losing money every year, and that is because it was anticipated years back that we would go before the voters and reform the district with a new tax rate. So of all the budgets, that's the only one that is structurally not sound. And we just heard, and for those of you who are in the room, at least a couple of you here in this meeting were in the room last week, our staff identified that's somewhere between 800 and 1.3, I believe, $1.5 million a year. We're going negative. So there is a lot of work and energy and things going into how we turn that around. And that's going to have to be either a massive cut of services or, frankly, I think our hope, we're banking really on going out to the voters for a tax increase at some point and a governance change and all of that. So that's the want to make sure I have a responsibility to let you all know that. And so that budget, of course, is extremely tight. And again, we got American Rescue Plan dollars to build the Concord project. I'm going to slide into the good news side of it. And that is we've got the biggest investment in the history of Oak Grove Jennings Lodge we've ever seen as it relates to parks and NCPRD. And we were able to do that with money that was put away. We were able to do that with system development charges, but primarily the big chunk of it came from the sale of the Hoodview Park way back when we acquired the Concord property, and we acquired 2 other properties, and also the American Rescue Plan dollars. We were able to keep that project afloat. So what this community is going to be realize here late next year, we'll be opening a new park, which is part of the Concord project, a community center, and unrelated to the NCPRD budget, we'll be opening a new Oak Lodge Library, Oak Grove Library. So that's a huge win for our community. And I just want to just end on a positive note. So I thank you, and I thank everyone who has been, whether you're a part of the task force or part of our community related to libraries or parks. And some of you know that well, you're all here. I just appreciate your support. Big, huge team effort, but a win for our community.
Thank you, Commissioner.
You bet.
Thanks for being here, and thank you for ending on an up note. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. And I have to prepare for that meeting I spoke of earlier with the state legislature. So I will be signing off and going to do my homework.
All right, good to see you.
Thanks
Take
for
care.
having me.
Okay, so we're going to move along, and I want to invite Neil Schulman from the North Clackamas Urban Watersheds Council to take over the screen. You're on.
Great, thank you. I will go through kind of a little bit of a update slideshow on what we're doing, but feel free to ask questions anytime. You don't have to wait till the end, although you certainly can. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in general, a little bit about what's going on with the Kellogg Creek Restoration Community Enhancement Project, and a little bit about what is going on science-wise, and a little bit about what is going on specifically at the confluence of the Willamette and River Forest Creek right now, just because you've probably noticed that the boat ramp is closed and there's a big excavator there. So that is really what I was planning on covering. But again, if there's particular questions or things you want me to address, I'm happy to do that. And I'm going to try and share my screen with a little caveat that I'm not at my usual computer. So these things might look a little different than I expect, but here we go. So, I am going to, I think I did I think I picked the wrong monitor. Give me a moment here, sorry.
Well, we could see that, so.
Yeah. Do you see a picture of a great blue heron now?
We do, thank you.
Okay, and does it advance when I press this button? It looks like I'm hearing no. Let me try this again. Did it advance there?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's our mission. Our mission is to make our watersheds great places for fish, wildlife, and people. A little bit of a background on what the Watershed Council is. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are not the government. We don't set policy. We don't regulate anybody or anything. We try and have as much impact as we can with a pretty small staff. There are 4 of us, and a pretty modest budget scale to the work that we're trying to do. And watershed councils are kind of a particular type of nonprofit in Oregon that were created back during the mid-90s when it became evident that the salmon populations were declining. For those of you who remember, and I'm sure most of you do, Oregon and Washington and the Pacific Northwest in general had gone through the big kind of very acrimonious struggles over forest policy related to the listing of the spotted owl. And the powers that be did not want to have that happen again with declining populations of salmon and stream health. So they decided to kind of encourage the creation of watershed councils, which again are these independent nonprofits, but are designed to really be the meeting ground for people and different entities like government agencies and landowners to collaborate and try and get more restoration done without that level of acrimony. And I would say by the general blush of things, it's worked. All of the streams in our territory, which I'll show you a map of in a moment, are salmon-bearing streams, and they have a host of other wildlife. One of our board members took this picture here of a northern flicker in his yard, and then I took this picture here of a bunch of people, because it's really easy to talk about fish and wildlife all the time, but first and foremost for me, there's 165,000 people who live in the area that we work in and rely on healthy streams for everything from enjoyment to protecting their property values to clean water, and all kinds of other benefits. So we don't want to forget about the people. And we've had a couple of incidents, you know, for those of you who, I'm sure nobody has forgotten the heat dome when I have a picture of the thermometer in my car reading 114 degrees. And it was about 25 degrees cooler in areas that had tree cover than in areas that didn't. And this is not shocking to anybody who's ever sought out shade on a hot day, that shady areas are cooler. But that's kind of what we kind of categorize as ecosystem services that matter to people. We know that having access to the outdoors is important for our health. There is also a lot of evidence that it's important, for instance, for kids who are maybe struggling with ADD, that time in nature helps them concentrate. And then there is also, and this is a picture that we took recently at Parmenter Ponds on Kellogg Creek, you know, a lot of our natural stream corridors and wetlands play a huge role in reducing flooding and providing cleaner water that we then don't have to create a fancy multi-billion-dollar treatment plant to do if we preserve our wetlands and let them store flood water and let it soak into groundwater. So we care about all of those things, not just because we love nature. I mean, we do love nature, but because they actually help us in some very practical ways. So as a watershed council, one of the ways that we're set up is every watershed council has a geographic territory. So this is ours. So we our office is right here in Milwaukee. So our territory includes this big drainage here, which is Mount Scott Creek, and then Kellogg Creek, which flows into Mount Scott Creek, and then Kellogg Creek here. They form and become Kellogg Creek just outside of the city of Milwaukee. And then getting down now into the Oak Grove area, we have the River Forest Creek watershed, the Boardman Creek watershed, and then down in Jennings Lodge, and then down in Gladstone, we have the Rynearson drainage. And then, of course, running through it all, we have this stream you've probably heard of called the Willamette River that is part of our territory too. So our boundary kind of our territory starts here at Meldrum Bar, where Rynearson Creek comes into the Willamette and ends here at Milwaukee Bay. The other thing that we always stretch is we're not a stream council, we're a watershed council. And a watershed is very different from a stream. A stream, we know what it is. It's a body of land or a body of water. The watershed itself is all of the land that drains into that water. And that can look like a lot of things. But basically, if a raindrop falls on, oops, sorry, I went backwards instead of forwards. And now I'm gonna wait for the PowerPoint to catch up. Sorry about that. There we go. So this picture on the upper left is Mount Talbert, and that's a forested area, and water that falls on that ends up in Mount Scott Creek, and that's close to where this picture of a salmon attempting to spawn was on the rare times that fish could get over Kellogg Dam. But it also includes things like Clackamas Town Center, and the water droplets that fall today when it rains are going to absorb everything that all of those cars might be dropping onto the parking lot. And that's going to run through the storm system and the pipes and eventually or over the ground and eventually end up in the stream. And it may or may not go through various forms of treatment when it does that. So we are actually a watershed. This is the key concept, is basically all of the land between ridge lines where the water eventually will end up in the stream. So we do care deeply about what happens in the uplands away from the stream, because again, we know eventually that's where it's going to end up. So our work includes a couple of different things, and I'm going to give you kind of a high level perspective here. The Kellogg Creek Restoration and Community Enhancement Project, which is our kind of big project for several years and several years more, will basically remove Kellogg Dam, replace the Highway 9090 bridge that is on top of it, restore Lower Kellogg Creek. We also do have habitat restoration projects that range vastly in size, from small to quite large. We do a lot of science and a lot of policy work based on that science. And we do a lot of education and stewardship and getting the community involved in all of those first three things. So the Kellogg Dam, or the Kellogg Creek Restoration Community Enhancement Project, a little bit of a story around Kellogg Dam. It was built before statehood, when this fellow on the right, who some of you have probably seen pictures of, was a first-term congressman. It was built at the latest by 1848 to sell flour to California gold rush miners, and remained in place through many decades. It actually hasn't served any useful purpose in a really long time. But in 1934, unfortunately, Highway 99E was built on top of it, and therefore removing the dam requires replacing the highway bridge. However, that highway bridge is 90 years old and is not going to survive an earthquake. So it needs to be replaced anyway. And then behind the dam, and here's the dam right here, right by the Willamette River in downtown Milwaukee, we have 14 acres that is almost entirely owned by the city that could be a future natural area if it wasn't underwater. And it's a really mucky mess. It doesn't have a lot of habitat value. It also has a couple of, it is also a rare chance to restore a functioning stream and have salmon populations in a city center, across the street from a high school, upstream from a middle school, or, just next to, Rao Middle School is right on the creek. And to provide all of those other benefits we talked about, places for people to access nature, places for floodwaters to expand. Right now, it's a full bathtub. When it's an empty bathtub, there will be a place for all of that water to go when we do get flooding. It is going to really be a way to, attract, to redefine downtown around a healthy stream and provide pedestrian access underneath the current dam, with a bike ped trail that connects Milwaukee Bay Park to downtown Milwaukee without having to play Frogger on a very busy state highway. So that's the overview of the project. This is kind of what it looks like. Again, it's a huge barrier to fish passage. It's the highest priority fish passage barrier that the Department of Transportation owns in the state. When the dam is passable, which is about 5 days a year, when the Willamette gets really high, like this picture here, we get this, which is a picture of a coho salmon trying to spawn in Upper Mount Scott Creek, but that doesn't happen often enough to sustain the population. Where we are right now is we are about to enter the final design process. The fellow on the right, who some of you will recognize as former then mayor, now state representative Mark Gamba, and the fellow on the left, who some of you will recognize as Senator Jeff Merkley, have been essential at really getting the project going. Gamba worked on it for many years before he was even on the city council. Senator Merkley has helped us get some federal funding that we were able to parlay into even more funding. And what's going on now is a couple of things. So if you've been around the area, you have seen big barges like this in the impoundment behind the dam. We are sampling the sediment behind the dam, because in order to finish the design, we need to know everything from the sediment depth, which varies highly throughout the lake, and also what's in it. There were some periods where ag chemicals were used, and that chemical information and that physical information is going to tell us what we need to really design the future river channel. So over the last year, you've probably seen a lot of this. You've also seen a lot of guys with fancy equipment, walking around with waders and vests, taking bathymetric measurements and all kinds of stuff, doing all kinds of the studies that we need. This is a general concept, this one here, of what the area will hopefully look like when the creek is restored, the lake is removed, with which is our closest guess to the general kind of thing it looked like before. Again, we don't have a lot of aerial photos from 1848 because we didn't have airplanes and we didn't have much photography. So we rely on what similar areas look like, and we rely on a few kind of back of the napkin ordnance survey maps that were around from that period that aren't very precise. But what it used to look like was probably a multi-channeled wetland stream with a bunch of different channels and some ponds and some wetlands. It probably had multiple channels that shifted when beavers built a dam here and then rebuilt it somewhere else the next year. It probably actually flowed into it and Johnson Creek probably formed a kind of complex series of streams where downtown Milwaukee is now that had multiple outlets to the Willamette. We obviously we can do some things to restore that in the upper reaches of the impoundment, but when we get down to the light rail bridge and the train trestle and the highway, we obviously are not going to remove downtown Milwaukee. So then it'll kind of form into a single threaded channel that goes under a new highway bridge that is earthquake safe and can accommodate a trail and have a large enough opening that juvenile salmon can get up into this area to rear. So that is the general Kellogg project right now. Where we are right now is we are about to enter the final stages of design. And that'll determine, again, from this concept, this is a concept, but we don't know that this meander is going to be here or, is it going to be over here? And that's what the sediment sampling information will tell us. The other thing we'll need to be doing in this is making sure that the gradient of that stream and the flow rate is sufficient so that small salmon, think of something about the size of your thumb when it's a kid, can make it up there to rear. And then there'll also be determinations in this next year or so of where our trail contact points going to be, where should they not be? Are there sensitive areas that doesn't make sense to have trails? What parts of the community need access? How do we keep people from kind of wandering onto people's private property using hedgerows and natural barriers and things like that? So those are all really exciting decisions to be making in the next year. And then we'll be raising money for it. It's a big construction project. We have a $15 million grant from NOAA Fisheries that will cover design, but $15 million does not get you, unfortunately, a highway bridge in this day and age. And so we are in the process of raising money. We've been working with Merkley and Wyden and Chavez de Reamer's office on that. And the good news is that the real money in the Infrastructure Act is in things like bridges, and we are replacing a bridge. So this is a 4-entity project. It's not just the Watershed Council. The city of Milwaukee owns the impoundment. ODOT owns the bridge. And then American Rivers is a national nonprofit that does river restoration. And they have staff they have 3 staff whose entire job is removing dams in Oregon and Washington. And they look at this and say, oh, that's not that big a project. So we're obviously very glad they're involved. So that is kind of a lightning quick overview of where the Kellogg Dam project is. And I'm going to shift to some of our other restoration work, but we can always come back with questions. So we do restoration projects that are large and small. On the small side, we work with streamside property owners to control invasive species and make sure that there are native trees and shrubs along their stream bank to create shade, which cools the water. Most of our water is too warm for cold water, especially for cold water fish, and warm water holds less oxygen than cold water. And to make sure that, and to also to control erosion, to hold the soil on the stream bank. And then we ask the property owners to maintain it. We have 163 sites, and we have a couple of targeted areas this year where we want to add more, mostly on Rynearson Creek and in Parmenter Ponds. So that's the small scale stuff. The big scale stuff is this. We do a lot of projects that are where we are, and this is what's going on in the River Forest project right now, where we are doing things like where a stream is incised, we are putting in log jams and pools and pulling the banks back so that the stream can access its floodplain more. Water can soak into groundwater at high water, which cleans it and gives us more late season water in the summer. We put in a lot of large wood because that's important cover for fish. It also makes the creek erode less, so it often protects nearby landowners as well. And again, it's a lot bigger than the volunteer blackberry removal party, but they're both equally important parts of stream restoration. This is what's going on at the River Forest confluence right now. So this is River Forest Drive. Just outside of the picture here is the Oak Grove boat ramp down at the end of the hill. And we are putting in a big log jam right here. We've already built these kind of rock weirs to create pools at high water. And this area here is like a gravel chute. And the goal here is to provide complexity for fish and wildlife at high water when the Willamette is really cranking. Again, if you're a juvenile salmon or steelhead or lamprey and you want to get out of the main current, they tend to duck into these creek confluences in the winter and spring, and they look for cover and shelter. And right now, this is really was just a trick water surrounded by riprap. So we are putting in rock weirs and log jams. This is one of the rock weirs being built last week. And again, just kind of using boulders, and then logs went in on top of the boulders. And this will be done by October 11th. And then hopefully, if, based on the science, fish use this habitat right away. That's what happened in Rynearson Creek. And this is really part of a larger strategy in our stretch of the Willamette to really do restoration at all of these confluences, because again, they're such important habitat. The Rynearson project was done in 2017, 2018. The River Forest project is under construction right now. We just talked about the Kellogg confluence. We just need to get them in there. And then the other project that we have is at the confluence of the Willamette and Boardman Creek, where we have a design. And we were working with two landowners to start to get ready to talk about, hey, constructing, does this sound like a good thing for your property? And one of them passed away, and then the other one sold their house. So we are now starting conversations with the new landowners, because everything we do is on a voluntary basis. Again, we're just a nonprofit. We can say, hey, we'd love to do this project that will enhance the stream on your property, but folks can say no, and we can't move forward until they say yes. That is what's going on at River Forest. Again, it'll be done on October 11th. It's a little hard to access right now because we had to close the boat ramp to stage equipment there. And it's kind of a steep bank up to private property. So we've been shooting some drone footage, and we'll be posting some photos on our Facebook page. We do ask that people don't try and go there now, because again, there's backhoes moving around. So it's we're trying to keep the people out and the equipment separated for the next 12 days or so. The other piece we do is we do a lot of science. And that is, some of it is done with community members, and some of it is done professionally, and some of it is done with remote equipment. And this is really just to tell us the basic things about what's going on in the streams and in the land around the streams. So if you've been around Milwaukee in the spring and it's just starting up now with school, we have something called the Student Macro Invertebrate Monitoring Project, where kids from Milwaukee High School and Rao Middle School and the Waldorf School have been doing macroinvertebrates, aquatic insect studies of Kellogg Creek below the dam, in the impoundment, and in the creek above the impoundment, using a PSU protocol that actually collects useful data with kids to track what the aquatic conditions are like, and then when the dam is removed, we'll be able to tell the difference. We have an ongoing temperature study where we have about 35 loggers that record stream temperature every 30 minutes from May until late October. And then we take them out and analyze the data, and that tells us some of the most important thing, which is where is there cold water in our streams? The North Fork of Boardman, for some reason we don't fully know yet, is quite cold. The South Fork, not so much. So does that mean there's springs somewhere? And if we can find them and make sure that they're restored, that the area around them is restored, then that helps what we're doing. We also have a thermal drone. We've been flying at some sites to try and spot things like springs and cold water plumes. We've done a bunch of eDNA testing. So we can actually take samples of water and test them for DNA of certain species: salmon, steelhead, lamprey, freshwater mussels, turtles, any species that there's a DNA sequence available for, and find out if they are present in that area within a couple of months. So that's how we've been able to find out, for instance, that every once in a while salmon can make it over Kellogg Dam, but there's not insufficient numbers to spawn. And we do know that we found freshwater mussels in some of our watersheds, which we didn't know were there. And then we can do the finer work of finding out exactly what habitat they're using and how do we protect that. We're also working with folks in Jennings Lodge, including Oak Lodge Water Services and the county, to see if we can identify places where some of the perpetual nuisance flooding, instead of flooding the road, could be allowed to flood a uninhabited area, and that could absorb the floodwaters and provide connection to the groundwater instead of continually flooding the road. That's still underway. We're hoping to begin a freshwater mussel study next year. And then in May, we had a BioBlitz at Kellogg Creek, and also NCPRD had one at Boardman Wetlands, which is a bunch of volunteers take a day, and we usually do it the same time every year, and we'll be doing it again in May this year, to count every critter they can find. We had a mussel group, we had a bird group, we had an insects group, we had a plant group, we had a reptiles group, we had you name it, because over time we can see changes then. And it's also a lot of fun. The reason we do that science is not only so that it drives two things. One of them is it tells us where to do restoration work. The other thing is that we hope it drives planning and policy. We have a watershed action plan that is a 10-year strategy. And what we then do is we work with our agency partners to try and help them, we do some of the projects, but also to work with them to do some of the projects. And the best example right now is, you can't really read this text, but we were able to work with Clackamas Water Environment Services to identify a big project at Three Creeks that is now in their capital improvement plan. We helped them also raise some additional money for it. It is going to go to construction in 2025. So we're really excited about that, and that is how we want to use this science to drive future projects. We work with the city of Milwaukee on their tree code because we have some opportunities, again, to increase tree canopy in certain areas. And, you know, the trees obviously provide a ton of benefits. We are also very interested in green infrastructure. You know, this is not these, a lot of times people think of this as like, ooh, it's a cool little planter for aesthetic purposes, and they're great for aesthetic purposes, but this is actually water treatment. This is treating the water off the road. And it's absorbing the pollutants before it goes into the stream. And there's a lot of things that were built before we know how to do this. So one of the things we're trying to work with our partners on is how do we get more of this on the ground? The other question, and this is a great example of it. This is the street right outside our office. I bet you 9 out of 10 people, if not 10 out of 10 people, do not think of this as a stream restoration project. They just think it's a road. But it's actually a road that's made out of something relatively newish called permeable pavement, where instead of the rain running off the road into the stream and bringing all of those road chemicals and oils and brake pad dust and tire pieces and all of those things that are harmful to the stream into the storm drain and then down into the stream, it actually soaks through the pavement and soaks through the ground, and the soil cleans it. And the good news about it is it works. I drive on this road every day. But it's, to most people, they just think it's a road because it works the same as a road. The other question that we have to ask in all of our work is we really ask who benefits. We know that in our watersheds, there are areas where people do not have access to nature. They don't have access to healthy creeks. And those tend to be the same areas, and these red and orange areas that also tend to have the worst air quality, the lowest levels of income, the most people of color, and the lowest levels of home ownership. Poverty and exposure to an unhealthy environment, unfortunately, tend to go together. A couple of other things I highlighted here. One of the schools we work with is 95% free and reduced lunch kids. And that's a pretty chilling statistic. And we want them to have the same access to nature and the same ability to go into a cooler, shady area when it's 115 degrees that everybody else has. The other thing that we do talk about is in our natural spaces, they are open to everybody, but not everybody tends to feel welcome there. And we want those to be places where everybody does feel welcome. And that's part of all of our jobs as people who care about, again, both fish, wildlife, and people. So the other thing that that we always need is help. We are a small nonprofit. Again, there's only 4 of us on staff, one of whom is part-time, and we are always in the process of raising money. And like the county, and like Commissioner Savas just said, we have what we consider to be a relatively robust budget of about 1.4 million, but most of that comes in the door and then goes out the door when we construct these big projects. Relatively little of it is stuff we have a choice about how we spend it, because it's in the form of grants that are for a very specific thing. So we rely on a couple of things. We rely on volunteers. We have events that are kind of the classic tree planting or restoration projects going on. We have one coming up on November 2nd with Friends of Trees. We also have people who help us with one-off projects, like everything from, doing things like, I don't know how to do, like, how do we get this printer to talk to the computer kind of thing, but also really one-off projects, like really understanding some of the policies that are being put forward and folks who have the time and expertise to read those. And then we have our volunteer board and several different board committees or committees of people who are not on our board, but have an understanding of finance or an understanding of fundraising and know how to organize events and things like that. So there are plenty of ways to contribute time if you have it and are interested. We also have a lot of people help us by advocating. You know, when it comes time to talk to, let's say, the Clackamas County Commission about whatever the thing is, the more people that ask for it, the more likely it is to happen. And if I go in and testify and say, hey, it would be really good if we preserved this natural area or did this project in this place, that's one thing. But if 10 people say the same thing, it has a lot more impact. And then the third part of it is we do ask people to help us financially because, again, most of the money we have, we don't have a choice of how we can spend it. And we are very dependent on individual donors for what we call the unrestricted funds, that are the things that we can use to pay things like our office rent in the Milwaukee Presbyterian Church, or buy paper clips, or all of the other, you know, our accounting and all of those ins and outs that you need to run an organization as well as do projects. So that is a very rapid fire overview of what the Watershed Council has been up to. And I'm curious what questions people have.
Thank you, Neil. That was really fascinating. There was a question that came in asking if when the work down by the river forest, let's see if I can read this better, if there will be signage talking about what has taken place down with the river forest confluence project. Will there be any informational marking?
Probably not there. And the reason for that is that it's on private property, except for the public piece of it, which is the Willamette River below the high water. And so on private property, the landowners don't want to sign because they really don't want to encourage people to come onto their private property. And I totally understand that. And on the Willamette River, if we put up a sign, it would probably get washed away in the winter. So, or hit by a log floating downstream, or a boat wake or something like that. So it is not, it would be neat, and we are planning on doing that on a project that we hope to do at a more public site in a couple of years, where, you know, that's actually owned by the city of Milwaukee and managed by the park and North Clackamas Park and Rec District. But on the river forest side, it's not really appropriate.
So I had a question about for the Kellogg Creek, the dam removal in that whole area. I do quite a bit of walking over the footbridge there by the trestle as well. And there's a significant amount of garbage. So is that a separate cleanup of all of what's in the water down there?
Well, when there is yeah, I mean, again, yeah, how many, yeah, we're always taking bets about how many shopping carts are going to come out of the lake when the lake is drained, and what else we might find. Remember, that impoundment has been sitting there since 1848. So there is going to be a lot of garbage in it. We don't know for sure until it is drained. And then, yes, there will be that part of the project, that whole restoration will involve removing a lot of the garbage from the lake and then restoring it and planting tons of trees that are and shrubs and native plants to cover that area that is currently water. You know, there will be sections of it that are still the new stream and the new wetlands and that sort of thing, but there'll be a lot of tree planting as well. It'll probably take a couple of years. It'll look pretty raw for a couple of years as dam removals tend to go until that vegetation really gets established. And we saw that when Reinierson Dam was removed in 2017.
Bob, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Good presentation. Quick question. It's probably too early, but I thought I would ask anyway.
Sure.
Any kind of word on significant pollution or anything they were finding in the core samples? I don't even think they probably sent them off yet, but.
No, we will not get them back from the lab until at the earliest right around Thanksgiving.
Okay. The other thing is any surprises? I'm not thinking dead bodies, but anything surprising that the crew ran across?
Not yet, because again, they're sticking this core down that is about 6 inches in diameter, and they're just coming up with sediment and basically putting it in a jar and sending it to the lab. So if they found something bigger than that, it would just get pushed out aside by this kind of hydraulic core that's going down. I would say the biggest surprise we've had so far is how variable there's fine sediment that has been washing down the creek again since 1840s that has been accumulating. And I think the biggest thing we found that surprised us was a big hole that we are pretty sure was the borrow pit that was used to make Highway 99E in the 1930s. So there was some areas where, for instance, that fine sediment is 5 feet deep, and then you go a few more feet and it's 25 feet deep or more because you hit that borrow pit where that really fine sediment settled in. But I would say the biggest surprise is how quickly and smoothly people with cranes who know what they're doing can lift a 24-ton barge and move it around.
Mark, you have a question.
Yes, Neil, I wanted to ask about the sediment that's in the Kellogg Creek now. Will you be removing a lot of that sediment as a part of rebuilding the creek bed?
Well, that is actually what the testing will tell us, is what we have to do with it or can do with it. So in dam removals, there's really 3 different things you can do with sediment. One of them is you can let it flush. And that's, basically we're probably not gonna be able to let a lot of it flush because the Willamette is a navigable waterway. And I'm sure that they don't want us to accidentally gum up the shipping channel with some of that sediment, because barges do go up and down the Willamette. Sometimes, and this was the case in the Rynearson natural area, they basically said, oh, well, they basically being the regulatory agencies, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Army Corps of Engineers basically tell you, oh, based on what we found and what chemicals we did or didn't find in it at what levels and where we found them, this is what you can do with it. Sometimes you just basically push it to the side and you make big mounds of it, and you don't actually have to remove it, and you can cap a lot of it with vegetation. You can use plants as a way to keep it in place, because their roots obviously hold on to the soil. And what we're expecting we'll probably have to do is a little bit of both. We might, probably a little bit of moving to the side and piling and some capping with vegetation. We know there's a lot of sediment and some of it will have to go off-site. We also know that the Port of Portland wants some of it for a project near the airport, which is convenient because that means we don't have to go find a place to dispose of it, and because that can be expensive. I also saw the question. No, that's a good question. That's one of the big design questions we'll get when we get these sediment test results back. I also saw Tina's question. Is there any concern in the Boardman Creek restoration about invasive species, such as large areas of yellow flag iris and numbers of nutria? We are always concerned about invasive species. Whenever you do a restoration project where you're moving equipment around and creating a disturbance, you're creating an environment that invasive species can spread to. And that's one of the reasons all of our projects have to come with a revegetation plan. And it always takes vigilance. Invasive species, one of the easiest ways for them to spread is by water. So on all of our streams, even if the landowner does everything they can possibly do to control the invasives, the fact that a seed could float down the creek from down upstream somewhere and land on their bank and start to establish roots is always a concern. So yes, we're concerned about it, and that's why we always have revegetation plans, and it always is a constant battle.
Great. All right, I think we have time just for one last question. I see Thelma's got her hand up.
I do. Neil, when we were working on the trolley trail, we attempted to get Metro to plan permeable asphalt, permeable pavement for the trolley trail, and were just completely shut out of the whole thing. I'm working right now on another huge pavement project in the community. And can you give me leads as to where we can get permeable pavement and how much the difference in cost is from that to regular pavement?
Well, I can tell you who I would talk to find out that information, and because the permeable pavement, and you'll hear it called both permeable and pervious pavement. It's the same thing. And it has apparently, I am not a road engineer, but it has come a long way. Like, it used to really have durability problems that I am to understand the new versions of it perform a lot better. The two people I would ask are Jennifer Garbley, who's the city engineer for Milwaukee, who did the Lake Road project, and Katie Holzer at the city of Gresham. And Thelma, I've got your email. I'll send you their contact info.
I would appreciate that.
I know that in the case of Lake Road, the pavement was more expensive than regular pavement. But because the city didn't have to build additional bioswales, detention ponds, stormwater treatment, the cost of the overall project was less.
Well, thank you.
I definitely would appreciate the information because you know what project I'm talking about.
I do.
Because it is right next to the Willamette.
Yeah, I'll get you their contact info. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Neil, for being here. An excellent presentation, and thank you for being willing to stay a little longer and take questions.
My pleasure, and obviously many thanks on my end to both Joseph and Bob, who volunteer their time to be on our board and help us do all this work.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's move on. Joseph, do we have anything with Lord this evening?
We did get an application yesterday, and it's for a new private dock on the Willamette River. And so I haven't really had time to review it or process it yet. But there's a pretty strict set of, as we've discussed before, there's a pretty strict set of standards that apply to docks on the Willamette River. And so what will be approved will look like all of the other docks that are on the Willamette River below the falls. There's just one basic set of standards that really applies, and so everything looks very uniform if you happen to go out there. There's quite a few more docks than there used to be, and they all look the same. So this one will look like those.
Good. All right. Committee reports. Do we have committee reports this evening? No committees. Public comments.
Maybe real quick, Valerie, I did have a report from Greg Winnison for CERT. So if I can read this, he is not here tonight, celebrating his 50th anniversary in Astoria. But he wanted to let everyone know that CERT is holding their CPR AED certification training. They started their first one last Saturday on the 21st. They have trainings that are coming up on the next few Saturdays. Rose Villa or Willamette View is on October 19th. And there's a first aid class on the 16th and on December 14th. These are all full certification trainings taught by certified volunteer instructors. There is no cost for this. There is a certification cost of $10 per class that has for you to get fully certified. There is a sign up sheet. I will put information in the chat while we're talking about if any of you are interested in that. I'll try to put that location where you can sign up for those classes.
Thanks, Mark. All right. Any other public comment, public input, announcements tonight? No? A quiet group? Well, if there's no other business for us to attend to, then we'll say that our next general meeting will be October 23rd. As we have talked about moving to a hybrid meeting, part in person and part on Zoom. Our goal had been to try to get that by the October meeting, so that's still a goal. But if not, at least before the end of the year, we would have one other meeting after that October 23rd meeting, which would be the first Wednesday in December. But you will be well informed ahead of time. And it would be the same Zoom link, so people could go on to the meeting that way, or we would be meeting in person. So we'll let you know. And if there's no other business, then let us adjourn.